Hi, everyone. Felt like it was a good day for some peaceful, quiet music. Nice to see you all. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 16th of December, 2024, and I am ECM. So for those of you who are already subscribers on the Patreon feed, you heard me talk a little bit yesterday about what happened with ABC over the weekend. We're going to talk about it some more today because there's just some additional analysis over the last 24 hours that adds more color to this and some breaking news related to it as well. And so it's worth discussing. But I want to answer a question as well today that's been coming up on the feed a lot, which is like, where are the Democrats, right? And I think as we head toward January, there's some folks who are having some concerns about what they're seeing and what they're not seeing. But there's some very insightful analysis out about this today, along with some thoughts about how to most effectively organize where you live. So we're going to talk about some great stuff today. Okay, first things first. I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. For our visually challenged viewers today, I'm wearing a gray I don't know what they call this. It's like marled sweatshirt type thing that's very comfortable. And it is raining really hard where I am today. So I am in my full cozy mode. My hair is down. My thin gold hoops are in, and I'm in front of a bookcase and my big cushy chair. And I'm really glad you guys are here. I'm coming to you as always from occupied, unceded Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay. So over the weekend, we had breaking news that notwithstanding the fact that there was a scheduled deposition coming up this week of both Donald Trump and George Stephanopoulos related to Donald Trump's defamation case against ABC and George Stephanopoulos for stating on the air in an interview with Nancy Mace that Donald Trump had raped E. Jean Carroll, which, by the way, had been confirmed in an order by Judge Kaplan of the Southern District of New York, who oversaw the E. Jean Carroll trial. ABC decided nonetheless to settle the case for $15 million in a donation to some yet to be determined foundation style, maybe library type thing of Donald Trump, and also to issue a written retraction. Stephanopoulos doesn't have to say it on the air. There was some misreporting about this to begin with. So let me just throw some extra color on this that we didn't have yesterday when I was doing Progressive Coffee Hour with our Patreon only subscribers, which, by the way, you can join us for every Sunday if you would care to, or Saturday. It happens every weekend, over at patreon.com/resistancelive. So yesterday we learned that an official from ABC had lunch with Trump's incoming White House chief of staff a week ago today. And that appears to have laid the groundwork for the settlement that then was announced on Saturday. One of the things that I want to say about this is that from a legal standpoint, there was no legitimate reason in fact or in law or in strategy for this case to have been settled. It was in many ways about as locked down a defense to defamation as you could ever hope to have, because an absolute defense to defamation is the truth. There was an order from Judge Kaplan saying that, in fact, in the pejorative sense of the term rape, that is exactly what Donald Trump had been found liable for. And the likelihood that ABC and Stephanopoulos were going to prevail in this case was extremely high, not to mention that a deposition would have related to whether or not, Trump had done what he'd been found liable of doing. So the only legitimate basis to settle this case is to curry favor for the incoming administration. Essentially, it's the idea that they want their press pass in the White House press corps, and they don't want to have to fight for it. And this is their way of making sure that they are in Trump's good graces. Is it moral? No. Is it capitulation in advance? Absolutely. Does it raise very troubling questions about the future of the media under the incoming Trump administration? Hell yes, it does. And in fact, there's quite a lot of reporting at this point to the effect that this settlement has enabled, fundamentally, Trump and his people to threaten other news organizations about what they perceive to be as flawed or critical coverage of not just the incoming administration, but their nominations before they're even in office. So we've spent a lot of time here over the last couple of years talking about what's happening in legacy media and the concerns about legacy media being complicit to lesser or greater degrees, depending on the institution, in the fall of democracy, or the looming fall of democracy, because it hasn't totally fallen yet. And this is once again another data point for considering that. If there is reporting, as someone is saying here in the comments, that Stephanopoulos isn't happy with the settlement, well, I have something to tell you about that, okay? There is no question that in Stephanopoulos' contract, there's a clause that says that ABC will represent him in any litigation related to his job, because that's pretty standard operating procedure. So he may not have had any say over whether or not ABC opted to settle this case, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? That's the other thing I just want to mention here. It doesn't really matter whether he's happy or not, because ABC made the decision to do it. And it's ABC that is his boss. Their parent company is Disney. And it says an awful lot about what their perspective is on their potential threat under the incoming administration. It's also a ridiculous amount. Can I just say something else about that? $15 million for a case like this is ridiculous, like, let alone with the facts as they stand. So none of it smells good. And we're going to be spending a lot of time, I have no question about it, in the coming weeks and months, talking about the impact of legacy media on where we've landed and are about to land. I'm not pleased about it, but I will tell you that I think that also, in a weird sort of way, it's not a surprise. One of the things that I was thinking about over the weekend is the way in which it's entirely possible right now to be horrified and not surprised at the same time. Somebody said this on one of my threads on Blue Sky, and it's so true. It's, at this moment, there are a ton of things happening that do not surprise me one bit and are still horrifying, despicable, not things I would want to see from anybody who was operating in good faith. So at this point, this is, again, just another indicator of where legacy media is falling right now. And it should, again, as with many other instances, like the Washington Post refusing to do an endorsement, the LA Times and their billionaire owner refusing to do an endorsement, Time Magazine, owned by Mark Benioff, putting Trump on the cover. All of these things should be raising concerns about oligarchy and about bending the knee and about the future of the media. Okay. I did have a question this morning on the feed that was like, where are the Democrats? And I thought this was a good moment to kind of like discuss this issue, because I think at this moment, there's sort of like a broad brush tendency to be like, why aren't the Democrats fighting back? And I have a couple of responses to that. The first is that we have seen quite a number, actually, of Democratic leaders step up and kind of like start the process of taking the incoming administration to the woodshed. One of them happens to be Elizabeth Warren. The other one is AOC. Maxwell Frost, who stood up and said some very important things. So has Jasmine Crockett. There are a number of Democrats who have actually like really started already the process of what I would term to be an internal form of resistance on the Hill. And that is happening more frequently and will as we approach January 20th and beyond it. Some people have been raising questions about, like, where is Chuck Schumer on these nominations? So this morning, in between teaching our dual power accelerator class, which, by the way, is going to reopen for registration in the new year, and we will have a spring cohort for that, so stay tuned. In between teaching our sessions of that today, I listened to an episode of what's called the End of the World podcast, which is with Adrienne Marie Brown, incredible visionary organizer, Autumn Brown, and today their guest was Daniel Hunter, who is an incredibly skilled trainer and the founder of Choose Democracy. And it's a really amazing conversation. But one of the things that Daniel Hunter pointed out in this interview, which they taped right after Gates withdrew his nomination, apparently. One of the things that he stated was one of the reasons why Schumer may be silent right now is because actually there is a recognition right now among Democratic leadership that when they get loud and push back against Trump, it actually enables Trump to do worse things. Now, this is a fine line, but I appreciated this point. And I wanted to bring it here today and share it with all of you, because I want you to remember what happens when the Dems kind of like go all in on everything in a very loud and I would say like aggressive way. What happens is that the ecosphere of the right wing, the media ecosphere of the right wing, lights them up. And that, by the way, enables the base. Then there is often an enormous amount of blowback and abuse on social media. There's abuse of elected officials and sometimes threats of violence. And then what happens next is that Trump takes that and his people take that as an invitation to do something worse. Okay. So I think there is an argument to be made. And it's the first time I'd thought about it through this lens. So all credit to Daniel Hunter for like bringing it to the table, that actually the willingness to not be the proverbial battering ram right now may be actually in some ways a very smart strategy, because it's not giving the Republicans something to batter down, right? Another latest talking point, another latest feature of like why we've got to do all these awful things. And to me, I think there's a real key moment of thoughtfulness that is upon us right now about what has worked historically and what has not. And I personally think, and this is the other thing I just have to say to all of you, and I know in some instances that there's a lot of organizing going on behind the scenes, a lot of consideration about what happened in the election, a lot of thinking and analyzing about what's going to work going forward. There's different people adopting different strategies. This is just as true, by the way, in the Democratic Party as it is in local and national organizing. A lot of different means being considered here of like what to do next, what the most effective thing to do next might be, which might be different for some of us, depending on what our skill sets are. And I personally think there's something actually quite wise about saying, actually, I'm not going to give you something to throw yourselves against right now. And that doesn't mean that, like you all shouldn't be calling your reps every day to complain about the nominations. Okay. Because by the way, I'm just going to say, I'm meaning your senators, because I'm just going to say one other thing. There's a difference between being like the figurehead that does this and being an individual working to save democracy, making your voice heard with the people who are supposed to represent you on the Hill. All right. In fact, I think you should be calling, as I've said many times on this broadcast, actually over the last couple of weeks, you should be calling the Hill like basically daily to complain about these nominations, even if your senators are MAGA, because it will tie up administration time in their offices. If they're Democrats, they need to hear your support. If they're Republicans, they need to know that you oppose it. And their staff is going to record every call that you make. So to me, one of the key features here is that we've got to be thinking strategically about what the Democrats might be doing as a whole, and also what we're going to be doing ourselves. All right. And I think that the demand for loud, immediate, like pushback and response is actually something that unfortunately has been baked into us by the division and the outrage farming, and the idea that if we're not going this hard, we're not doing anything. When in fact, what we need right now, in my opinion, and again, you can all go listen to this episode, which I really recommend you do. It's like an hour and a half. There's a transcript. It's a beautiful conversation. What we actually really need right now more than anything is a recalibration in the direction of movements that are kind of based on love and a willingness to be able to welcome people into movements that maybe will not even be aware that they need to be doing something in response to this until some of the horrible things that may be coming come home to roost. All right. We've got to be prepared to welcome in people in our own communities who maybe just don't care or don't think it's going to touch them. Right. And start thinking about how we're going to be acting in response in ways that are different from the like, we're going to beat these people into submission, or like, we've got to fight back to win. Right. The strategies that we need to adopt right now are different. Right. They're different. And Jean, this is a really interesting point. Jean in the comments is saying, is this it, or rather someone else, sorry, is saying, isn't silence reframing their abuse? I actually disagree. I mean, I will tell you that I don't think that silence in this instance, because he's not being silent. He's just like Schumer's just refusing to come out all guns a-blazing, right? And there's a difference. There are people who are out there pushing back on behalf of Democrats, but if you've noticed, they're doing it kind of strategically differently. And so, again, yeah, really good point. Not every situation requires a hammer. And I'm just going to say this. What really matters in relation to these nominations is the vote. How are they going to vote on these nominations? That's what really matters the most. Not whether they're out there screaming about them right now. How are they going to vote? And I can guarantee you that, the work on that is already being done behind the scenes, both with Republicans and with Democrats. So something to think about there in the context of I demand the Democrats be doing X actually may not be the wisest thing at this moment. And I'll also just add that, one of the things to keep in mind here is that organizing is going to take many forms in the coming days and weeks, right? And all of us, again, you will hear this if you listen to this episode, but this is also something that I've been saying literally for years now, at least 10 years. All of us have something to contribute. And it's really important to figure out what your lane is, right? What are you really good at in your own skill set, or what do you believe you might be good at, and move in that direction, right? You don't have to do everything. You certainly don't have to be everybody. You also don't even have to lead anything. There's plenty of organizations on the ground where all of us live that are doing really great work for marginalized people, for people who are suffering, for people who are vulnerable. And it's important to get involved where you can, okay? But one of the things that I want people to be thinking about here is how are you going to be doing that work where you live, right? And it's not going to look like huge, massive marches in the street, right? We've talked a lot about this here. One of the things that was also discussed on this podcast that I just want to raise here, which I think is really important, is that Adrienne Maria Brown was talking about the reflection that she's done on how she survived the first Trump administration. And she made some decisions, which are so smart, that were essentially like, I'm not going to let him be in charge of my life, right? Not everything that I do in the world in my day-to-day is going to be in response to or in engagement with Donald Trump. I'm actually going to do things, no matter what he and his people are doing over here, that are things that move my community forward, or that are things that maybe like are about just living your life, right? That I'm not going to center on him in all of these obsessive ways about what's the latest thing that he's going to do. And in fact, what I'm going to do is make decisions about what I value. I'm going to like live into the things that I value. And that to me struck me as incredibly wise advice. It's very consistent, by the way, with one of the things that I've been saying about how everybody should like check out of mainstream media for a while if you need to, and take this time, this window, as one of reflection and of like, you know, taking care of yourself and resting, because we're going to have a lot to do come January. But I do want to just point this out, right? The more that we are obsessively focusing on Trump, the less that we are doing to actually like get ready for Trump, the sequel, right? Does that make sense? So I want you to think about this right now. And Adrienne also had a couple of really, and Daniel Hunter in this conversation had a couple of, and Autumn had some really good suggestions for questions to be asking people where you live, right? So let me just say this, like, what do you need, right? Is a great question to ask people, right? What are the resources that you need that you don't have access to? And, you know, like, how can I help to support you, right? These are also questions that other people should be asking you if you yourself are in need. So much of what needs to be done here is about reframing this moment, right? Reframing this moment as one where we in collective, and yes, this is all concepts of dual power. Like if you're in the course, you've already heard me talk about this a lot already. But, you know, like if you think about it from the standpoint of like, we are building the society that we want by the relationships of trust that we are building for the long haul where we live, you will start to actually see that like there's already an undercurrent underway right now of disrupting what Trump is planning. And it's really important to not capitulate in advance, not only in the way that like we look at ABC, but also by assuming that everything that he is saying he wants to do is actually going to get done. So remember this, right? A lot of this is trial balloons. A lot of this is throwing up nonsense and waiting to see what sticks. A lot of it is throwing up nonsense and waiting to see who capitulates. And the reality of where we sit right now is that we really have no idea what he's actually going to be able to do. Do I think there's going to be some horrible things like we talked about on Friday? Yes. Okay. Do I also think that a lot of this stuff they're not going to be able to get anywhere near? Yes. And so one of the things that we have to do here is reframe, right? Reframe it as like, you know, us versus them, okay, into us with us, right? And they're over here, and we will respond and disrupt when the moment is right, right? But right now it's us with our people. And that right now, like moving in the direction of thinking about caretaking as movement building is critical to where we find ourselves, right? So stop demanding that Democrats get into like battles. Right there, and some of them already have like indicated that they're willing to do that when he takes office. All right, but there's no need right now for, I guess what I would call political warfare that simply reinforces Trump's authority. Right. What we have a desperate need for is making sure that we are in community with people who we trust where we live, so that people can survive and be in safety and perhaps even thrive under what's coming, you know? And we also, you know, the other thing I'm just going to say here, because I've talked about this a little bit, but I was reminded of it also listening to this episode, that one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is not just that they may not be able to accomplish what they're setting out to accomplish or they're trial ballooning, but also that like everything could be different by January 20th, right? People don't talk about this a lot, but like there's a way in which there is sort of a foregone conclusion that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. You know, we could be in a totally different situation come January 20th or come March or come like August, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. And, you know, again, part of finding a way through this is being in community with people that you trust, but also not falling for the fascist mindset, right? Because that's what this is. When you step into this space, you're buying their nonsense that like, it's all going to be awful. There's nothing that can be done. They're going to do all these horrendous things that they're claiming they can do that they can't, or that they may not be able to. Because by the way, like resistance lives in many forms, including in local law enforcement and other places. Like, let's not forget that. Okay. It may not be what we think it's going to look like. So it's time to spend some time being in community with people in circles of care and asking what people need, right? And thinking about what you need. And then decentering the addiction to Trump and his narcissism and his people. Because the less attention that they get, the less capitulation in advance there will be. Okay? So it's just so critical. And, this is, again, I'm giving you guys just like a little tiny, like surface level thing of what we're doing in the dual power accelerator, but this is what it's really all about. You've got to find ways of building power where you live with trusted people, no matter what's going on over here. And it's just so critical right now. And I know a lot of people are really scared, but like the way that you address that fear is by actually taking action to be in community with circles of care. It's just like so important. All right. So anyway, I highly recommend that you go listen to the episode of this week's End of the World, or I think it's called Living Through the End of the World podcast, Survival at the End of the World. Adrienne Marie Brown, Autumn Brown, the guest this week's Daniel Hunter. It's an hour and a half of greatness. Like, you should all go listen to it. Okay. So we already talked about calling Congress on nominations. Somebody asked a question about what happens if Trump tanks the economy, which is another thing that he may not be able to accomplish. All right. Can he be like removed from office for defying the Constitution? Okay. The only way that there's only two ways that Trump can be removed from office. Well, there's three, but two that like other people have some influence over. All right. One is the 25th Amendment, which you all will remember from the first term, is where like a certain percentage of the cabinet with the vice president get together and say, we're removing you, in which case the vice president takes the office. And there's a window of time then for there to be like a hearing on the Hill on whether or not the 25th Amendment was properly invoked. Okay. Highly unlikely. Second way is impeachment. Again, highly unlikely in this environment because, House and Senate are under Republican control, albeit with a very slim majority in the House. And the third way is that he suffers a health incident or something else and he's no longer alive, right? I will just tell you that I think that one of the things that people have to come to terms with here is that the way that our government is set up is that there is a certain degree of power that comes with the presidency that even though protections were set up, I'll just say I don't think the founders ever anticipated. I think they did, actually. There's some indications in the Federalist Papers that they did. But nonetheless, the idea that there would be someone this amoral ascending to the office not once but twice and after inciting an insurrection was probably a little bit beyond the pale in terms of what they were thinking about. So the means of removing him are what are prescribed by the Constitution. And that's pretty much it. Okay. If he tanks the economy, he tanks the economy. He can't, nobody's going to remove him for tanking the economy. And so I have to just, remind everyone that, there are going to be difficult days ahead. Okay. It doesn't mean that things are hopeless. And I think that one of the things that we have to consider here is like to start thinking about like, how are we going to get through this? Right? How are we going to get through it for however long it lasts, with the understanding that we have no idea what's to come? And I really do want people to kind of like understand that hopelessness and isolation are what they want, right? The way to not give the fascists what they want is to refuse to live in isolation and hopelessness. And that, again, means, just to go back to today's theme, that you've got to get into community with other people. And you've got to start working to create safety for yourself and for people who are vulnerable and marginalized. And you've got to get in with organizations that are already doing that work if they exist where you live. Okay. It's all just like profoundly critical right now. Okay. Tim Cook did go down and have dinner with Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago on Friday night, which basically means like all of the tech company folks have now kind of like bent the knee and kissed the ring. Look, there's a lot that could be said about this from the standpoint of capitulation. Some of it is selfishness. Some of it is business interest. Some of it is about wanting to make even more money, even though they have more money than God already. I'm not pleased about it. I think it says something about what we can expect from digital security in the coming months and years, hopefully not. One of the things that again, I just have to say about this is that like I am not surprised. I may be horrified, but I'm not surprised, right? Because there is something, and again, we talked about this a little bit on the Patreon Progressive Coffee Hour yesterday, but there is something about being so wealthy that you are so far removed from the lives of everyday ordinary people and a total lack of empathy for the impact of your actions on like everyday people. And I think we're seeing that in action constantly. Like, and it's sad and disturbing and, you know, a sign of one of the many reasons why wealth inequality is a really bad idea. But I also just want to point out that from an international level, there's a certain degree of strategizing going on right now to try to make sure that, for instance, with foreign leaders, their own people are protected. That's what we're seeing with Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, the president of Mexico. We're seeing kind of like efforts to, how shall I put it, get in Trump's good graces in a way that is astute and carefully thought out so that adverse impact doesn't come to those countries as a result. So it's an interesting time. Humor is a coping mechanism, as I keep saying. Okay. Somebody asked me a question about what I thought Biden should do in the last window of his term. Well, top of list for me, which is entirely within his authority, is I want him to clear the row. This movement, if you guys have not read about it, you can check out the hashtag clear the row. It's essentially about commuting every death penalty sentence in federal prisons to life imprisonment without parole. The death penalty, as many of you know, is entirely racistly administered in this country. There's also, more instances than I can count where innocent people have been put on death row or in fact put to death. And I think there's an incredibly important opportunity here for Biden to really cement his legacy by commuting those death penalty sentences and clearing the row. Beyond that, and I know there are people out there with like fantasy land wished kind of things. There is not a huge amount that Joe Biden can do right now that would not be immediately reversed by Trump when he steps into office. And so for everybody who's like, I want an executive order on this, or I want an executive order on that, or he might as well try to waive every single student loan, which he's already kind of tried to do, and had it challenged in court. All of these things are really nice things to think about. But the thing I want to remind you of is that anything that is within that power, like commutations are not going to be reversed. Okay. Because that's not how pardons and commutations work. But if he signs an executive order that says, I don't know, hypothetically, I'm declaring that abortion is legal and should be available up to a certain window or forever, right? Like in any state in the country, that's going to be immediately reversed by an executive order under Donald Trump. I have to say that I think that there's a lot of wishful thinking out there right now that, X, Y, and Z could be done, and it's not possible under the law, right? I also know that there are people out there who are really pushing for the ERA. And you all know, I mean, look, this is a tough one for me because, of course, I support the ERA, but also the window for publication of the ERA expired in 1979. And, this push, which I guess I get it, but there's also a part of me that feels like of all the things to do right now, when we know there's a problem with it, the push for it strikes me as a little bit, I don't know, ambitious. Because it's going to be turned around in a court of law the second it happens if he instructs the archivist to publish it. And the final vote to confirm the ERA happened literally decades after the date was expired. And so I wonder why we're not focusing on other stuff, frankly. But that's me, right? People want to push for it. That's fine. I will just tell you that I think it's a fruitless effort that's not going to go anywhere in the long run. And so that's that. All right. Okay. Final thing I wanted to note for today. Well, two final things. For those of you who are not aware yet, we are taking off on the broadcast all of next week and through the 2nd of January. The broadcast will return on Friday, January 3rd. I haven't done this in years now, taking this long off from this broadcast. So I will be off next week and the 4 days of the following week. Okay. Also, there will be no Progressive Coffee Hour for our Patreon subscribers next weekend or the following weekend. Also, more significantly, which you all should be aware of, I am leaving Threads on Friday. I am closing out my account. So for those of you who follow me on Threads, first of all, please subscribe here on YouTube and hit that bell notification so you are notified every time I go live here. But also, please make sure you follow me on Blue Sky. My handle is EC McLaughlin, like it is everywhere else. And it's very critical to me right now to not be engaging on meta-based platforms as much as possible. That's Threads, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. So I've been off Facebook entirely since 2019. I am trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my Instagram account, but I am kind of done with Threads. I don't feel good about it. I don't feel good about it from a data farming perspective. I don't feel good about it in terms of political content being suppressed. Blue Sky feels like a much happier place to be right now. It's not perfect, but I'll tell you what, the block lists of MAGA really work very well. It's like a lot safer than any platform I've been on in at least the last 10 years. So that's that. I will be gone from Threads as of Friday, and I want to make sure everybody kind of knows that, and you should hop on over to Blue Sky if you want to follow me on social media. Okay, that's it for today. I will catch you all back here live tomorrow. I am here live at regular time all week this week. And I also will just in advance wish you all a very happy holidays. I hope you are getting some rest. This is going to be our last window of being able to kind of rest and nourish ourselves before things get really crazy come January. So please take the time. And I'm going to model that as well by taking my own little bit of vacation time here. All right. Thanks so much, you guys. I will catch you all here back tomorrow and wish you all a good Monday. Bye.